On today's episode of Factor of the Future podcast, Dr. Steve Wright is an author and cybersecurity attorney who works with business leaders to understand the hidden risks from the data and the AI-based systems that rely on to run and grow their businesses. The increasing digital transformation of many businesses has created several new threats that many are not aware of and have no systems in place to protect against. Businesses are increasingly relying on different types of feed that come out of the organization. The data is often targeted to the humans and in the organizations that IT assists. David's also published his book, which is come out, and it is called Securing the Data Supply Chain, Data Governance in the Digital Age. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Factor of the Future, People-Powered Alpha, a podcast focused on trends shaping the future of manufacturing. I'm Alexandria Burek, your host, here with A.W. Schultz, two thought leaders with a passion for people and manufacturing. Today and every episode, we are diving deep into the advancements, sustainable practices, and dynamic changes transforming how we produce everything.
And now welcome Alexandria Burek and A.W. Schultz.
Good catch. And I'll edit that part out. Dr. Stephen Wright, you're on our podcast for the future today. And one of the things, I guess, just to get the conversation going, could bring us up to speed on what is a cybersecurity attorney. And I think it might lead into kind of really where probably your career has probably led you.
Sure. So attorneys in general are providing legal services, so any representation of clients either towards other adversarial parties or towards the court system. So that's sort of legal representation. And most people think of attorneys probably from the TV shows as much more dramatic courtroom activities. And some attorneys do practice in that space. There is another side to the business of being an attorney, which is providing advice to clients, as in, here's an opinion letter, you can do this, don't do that kind of advice.
Yeah.
And so if I take that rough definition and later on to it, if you get a specialized attorney, generally they have some qualifications that let them work in a more specialized area. So in my case, as a cybersecurity attorney, I have some cybersecurity qualifications as well that would qualify me to understand what the cybersecurity issues are and deal with the legal consequences of those or preparations for those.
So do you find it's quite a bit different in different regions? Or is it kind of your specialty in your area? So
the cybersecurity technology issues are pretty much global. There are some regional regulations that are different, and it comes down to the again, sort of the advice and preparation side of things versus the, let's say, the dealing with the consequences of some cybersecurity event. And in that case, so if you have just a cybersecurity breach, for example, then you have you may have a duty to notify people of that existence of that breach, and so who you have to notify, what you have to tell them, or what you have to not tell them. There's different rules for that depending on the state you're in and the country you're in, and so forth. So dealing with the aftermath tends to require a lot of understanding of the particular industry you're in and the regulations that apply.
Very interesting. So would you say a majority of your work is in the advising and the preventative nature of like preventing basically the breach and preventing the issues versus dealing with the breach after it's already occurred?
Exactly.
Okay, great. That's what I was sort of picking up on. I was like, oh, so like his main objective, which makes sense, is to guide and advise clients against a potential downstream breach or issue.
Exactly. So you trying to advise clients so that they don't need breach remediation services.
Yeah, that's great.
Or at least maybe just to push off the day until it happens, as long as we can.
There we go.
The reality is that there are no breach-proof systems. It's just how do you make yourself a less attractive target than the next one out there? And if you truly are in the crosshairs of some nation-state actor, for example, then there's going to be a challenge to keep.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are like the top 3 threats that you're currently most focused on preventing with your clients? Like, how do you think about if there was like a top 3, if I'm a business owner or a business leader, what should be the top 3 that I should be aware of? Like what's kind of hot in cybersecurity right now?
For me, the 3 things that I tell people are emerging and they need to worry about are deepfakes, data poisoning, and data suppression. Because these are different types of things to what they normally think of as cybersecurity events. So normally with cybersecurity, you're used to thinking of trying to keep your systems and processes safe. So you're worried about firewalls and antivirus software and governance procedures like that on the data internal to your systems. And now in the age of AI, and even with data analytics type stuff, you get you're much more dependent on data that's coming into your organization, and other companies downstream from you and consumers downstream from you are dependent on the data you're putting out. And all of your existing firewalls and so forth aren't really focused on this aspect. So you may think of a supply chain for physical goods, but if you take the analogy of a data supply chain, what's the data that streams into your organization that your organization builds its daily operations around, and then passes out with your products and services? So it's not just the products and services themselves, it's all of that metadata and data that's just flowing through industry. And so if that gets suppressed, if things you need aren't in the data, you can't get access to certain data that you used to rely on, somebody poisons the data with malicious information, or not even necessarily malicious, if it's just incorrect data, how do you account for that? That's normally you have some sort of file protections like checksums and things like that you rely on. But those are mostly syntax checks. They don't really check the semantics of the data that's passing around in the files. So you really need to take it a step further, and is there some out-of-band way to cross-check the data and make sure it's valuable? Is there some way to check the provenance of the data and how many hands it's gone through, that kind of thing? And that shows itself up in the deepfake side of things as well. When I talk about deepfakes, people tend to, or at least the more well-known social media type example would be something like revenge porn, right? Or pick your favorite political opponent and put them in an embarrassing situation. But this happens in the enterprise as well. You get impersonations of CEOs and company executives. And I think there's been a few of those that have gotten some publicity. There's been sort of the reverse things as well, where you get cases where, for example, a company executive was in an online multi-party Zoom conference, and he was the only real person. All of the others were deepfake video actors scamming that company. They lost several $1 million out of it. So, and there's all sorts of these deepfakes, both on voices and video as well. And so it's becoming a bigger issue in the commercial space than most people are aware of.
I'm just thinking of the baby boomers out there that aren't as, we'll say, tech savvy as maybe some of the younger generations. And what would you, is there something you could tell them to, certainly be cautious, some of the I don't know, signs they could look out for to try to protect themselves?
I think most of the advice comes back to critical thinking and what was the phrase from Ronald Reagan? Trust,
no offense,
verify
but,
kind of thing. It used to be that manipulating images and video was just so technically complicated that faking them was not a practical matter, and so you didn't really have to worry about that. But now there's so much of that happening in the political sphere, let alone any geopolitical conflicts going on, that you have to really question the provenance of what you're being shown, and be careful not to rely on things from one source unless you've really had some other means to verify that source or build trust in that source.
Yeah, that's true. What about the future? Where do you see the cybersecurity in the next 5-10 years?
More of the same, probably worse. So as the economic situation becomes more stressed for some people, then they get more motivated to look for the low-hanging fruit of various forms of crime, and so there becomes more incentive for people to do this. And as the AI tools become more widely available, that unfortunately makes it easier for less sophisticated parties to do this. So it becomes not just nation-state actors, but smaller groups, but with access to sufficient computing resources to do significant damage. So that's sort of one tack of things. The other is things like quantum computing are becoming closer to reality, and there are folks who'll tell you it's all imminent, and others who'll say no, it's going to be many years away from now. But there are serious folks that are worried about there being sufficient capabilities in the near future that storage type attacks, save the data now and decrypt it in a year or two now when you've got the capabilities, is a threat vector that we need to be worrying about. And so there are initiatives to try to improve cryptographic algorithms to be post-quantum, and that sort of transition for all of those algorithms is something that's just barely starting. So, and those things are so widely deployed, it's I think it's almost like a Y2K kind of situation again, because there's so many crypto algorithms out there, and how easy are they to replace and update? And who exactly does the replace and update, and how do you find out? Because it's not. Some of them aren't easily. They aren't things that enterprises have been necessarily tracking as well as they perhaps need to.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Just a quick break, and then we'll get right back to the show. We are always open for meaningful sponsorship or guests that align with our audience. If your brand fits and would like to be on one of the top 10% podcasts in the world, let's chat. Reach out by email in the show notes. Back to the show.
Kind of segues into a story I heard, right? So like, everything, there's always good and evil with anything there, out there. And I've heard about, you obviously have like malicious bots, malicious AI. And then on the converse of that, you have like the bots for good or whatever you want to call it. Are you seeing that unfolding a lot in your industry and in the work that you're doing, where we've got like the good team versus the bad team? And do you see how that's, or I guess, what are you seeing in that regard?
Yes. So there's that kind of thing, is that sort of cat and mouse play is fairly standard in the cybersecurity space. You have the defense and the offense teams. You see lots of companies employ red teams to try to penetrate their systems and build confidence in that way. And so that's not a foreign concept. So yeah, it is sort of a continuous escalation.
That's interesting that you mentioned companies hiring their own teams to hack their own. It makes sense when you say it, but I think for those of us who don't work in that space, wouldn't really think much about hiring a team to hack your own software or your own ecosystem. So that's interesting that you bring that up. I think one of the other questions, Stephen, I'd like to get your input on. If I'm a worker and I'm using, I want to use AI, maybe the company doesn't necessarily provide it to me, or they provide a model that I'm not familiar with or haven't developed a working relationship with, right? What advice do you have for the worker who's trying to use AI and kind of develop that skill set, but also doesn't want to put their company at risk? So how do you think about using like AI safely in the workplace, and especially when there's not a lot of AI tools provided in the workplace?
Yeah. So I think the first thing for the employee to realize is companies have reasons why they aren't making these tools available. That could be a cost reason. It could be a different business reason where they are concerned with particular liabilities or particular licensing constraints from those AI providers. So a common concern would be if you are using one of the common consumer web-based models, then you're sending, every time you make a query, you're sending your information to that cloud provider. And so what protections are there on your information when you're doing that? Is it something the company can rely on? So if you are a lawyer, for example, you can't put any client information in that kind of system, because once it gets out of your hands, it's no longer in your control. You've just voided any client attorney privilege there, and so that's kind of a disaster for your client. Similarly, if you're an enterprise, you may have all sorts of intellectual property that could be being disclosed through that mechanism. And depending on the business you're in, what really prevents the AI company from learning not just how to improve their model, but learning your business model and then setting up as a competitor to you when you're doing
I've
this.
heard a lot about that, yeah.
And so there are some folks that some enterprises that had made their information available and are now finding themselves in a position where they're competing against a former supplier, if you like. Yeah. So there's some real reasons why companies need to be a little careful about that, and in fact, running models locally might well be a much more appropriate approach.
That's what I'm seeing or hearing, is that AI is moving from like a web-based model to like a machine level model. So then you own and control all of your data and information exchange with, and it's more contained than say using especially like a Chat GPT or Grok or Claude.
Yeah. So the ones you can download and run yourself typically are the open source models, and there are a variety of these. They come in different sizes with different quality responses, if you like. So if you are, to give you an example, on the smaller scale end, you can get a Gemma 4 model from Google, which runs on the latest Apple cell phones, so on an Apple 17, I believe.
Yep.
So they generally scale with the amount of memory available. So getting something down to the memory on a cell phone is pretty impressive, actually, from the Google folks.
Are we kind of going backwards then on that? Because it was a couple of years ago. Let's all have, let's get rid of the servers, put it on the cloud, and now we're coming back to that physical system that we have.
Yeah, for a lot of companies, putting things out to the cloud makes sense. If you're a startup, for example, it makes it much easier to scale if you can outsource your infrastructure. But you need to be, on the other hand, careful about how you outsource things and who you trust and how much you really need to outsource things. And as these models have been improving, the amount of resources required to run them locally has been coming down. And so where you may have heard of these models in terms of the number of billions of parameters that they use, that translates into how much RAM they need in the computer to run them. So the big frontier models typically run in cloud computing environments that are set up to have multiple terabytes of RAM and spread the thing there. That's a very specialized type of computing environment that you typically wouldn't have in your basement. But you can get models running on, just to continue with the Apple theme, a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio with sufficient memory in them. You can run reasonably comprehensive models that will perform for most tasks. They're not quite the bleeding edge of the frontier models, but are they good enough for a lot of people? I would suspect so. I think even some of the variants of the Kimi K3 stuff coming out of China also fit into that category. So it's becoming feasible. A fully loaded Mac Mini is a few $1,000s. A little cluster of Mac Studios that's fully loaded with memory is maybe $50,000. It's something that you could put in the closet for a small business has the need. It's within their budget capability to think about.
I'm curious. So what led you into this career path? That's always an interesting question. And it's clear to me as we've talked, like you obviously have a passion and a deep interest and knowledge of technology. So did that play into it, or how did you land in this career path?
So I guess one way to look at my career, I've been just working my way up the protocol stack. So I started with electrical engineering, did some integrated circuit design, worked up through network protocols, did my PhD in computer engineering, and just spent more time working up into the management and politics layers of the protocol stack, if you like. And so it's not just a matter of from the technology side, it's what's an interesting technology and what's something interesting you can do with it. From the politics or the legal side, it's more about what should you do with it. Is this really a ethically appropriate thing to be doing? So that's not always obvious when you're in the depths of some technical problem.
Interesting. So did you go to law school after you got your PhD then?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
And you have a book. And you're also
yes.
an author. And it's called Security, the Data Supply Chain. If you had to tell our viewers of a Factor of the Future podcast, what could they take away from it if they were interested in it? Is there a couple things that come to mind?
Yeah. So the first thing is the notion of data governance and risk management is probably more important than you think. This tends to get pushed off to some compliance department off on the side, if one exists. In a big company, you tend to have lots of folks, and you tend to have a compliance department that's worried about all sorts of other legal compliance issues, and then they all of a sudden get these technology issues thrown at them as well. But on smaller companies, you tend not to have that, and it's much more resource constrained, and it starts as an IT problem and just make our system safe and keep our people safe kind of thing. And it really is a bigger business issue that more senior people need to understand and accept or mitigate whatever risks are appropriate for their business. There's a real business decision there that needs to be considered, because you can spend a lot of money and still not get perfect security, perfect prevention. But if you do nothing, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So there's a real business balancing decision about, okay, how much is it going to cost us? How much protection will we get from both legal and technical attacks that might come our way?
Okay.
Fantastic. Well, Stephen, is there anything that you've left unsaid that you'd like to share with the audience, or?
Just since it's the Factory of the Future podcast, I would think for the folks looking at the more operational technology as opposed to information technology, that don't feel left out. All of this stuff is coming your way as well, because it used to be the case that your typical industrial machinery was air-gapped from the internet, and that's less and less true. There's more and more reason that manufacturers of that type of equipment find ways to need to keep contact with their machines for maintenance and failure detection and things like this, and the service aspects of things. But that does open up all sorts of issues, and the consequences of penetrations there also can be significant, not just for that company, but also for other companies and for the public at large. So just to give a public example that you may be well aware of, back during the COVID period, there was a cyber attack on a company called Colonial Pipeline down in the Atlanta area where I am, which had the unfortunate consequence of getting into some of their operational systems that manage the pumps and valves and their infrastructure, because they are a oil pipeline company that had the effect of limiting the amount of gas that was available in various areas. So there were significant consequences to that particular attack. So
the hackers basically held hostage the operation until they received the ransom. Is that correct?
not sure of the details of exactly what they got. But yes, there was some ransomware aspect and some control penetrations there as well, or at least removal of access. And that can be just as bad. Yeah. And that raises up the other piece, though, in particularly when I'm dealing with smaller firms, rather than starting with something terribly sophisticated, I tell them to worry about just getting basic backup and retrieval automations in place and exercising them. Yeah. And that's already a challenge for very small companies. But that becomes even more of a challenge when you've got operational technology, not just IT. So all of a sudden, if you've got big spinning machines that you need to reboot and reset and reconfigure, that becomes how do you do that on a basis that doesn't disrupt your operations? I mean, it's maybe one thing on a machine shop that could be you have one lathe that you could take out of service and do whatever you got to do, and then move your workload over onto another. But if you are a critical infrastructure provider, so sewage treatment plant, a water treatment plant, gas pipeline, electricity, you name it, you can't exactly shut some of these things off. I mean, some other industrial processes, like metal refineries, shutting those things off has significant consequences. It could take you, if you shut off your metal refinery, all of a sudden you have molten metal that's become solid in various pieces of machinery that weren't intended to have that. So you have to disassemble everything and start it over again. So it's a major hassle. So you really need to be thinking about, okay, how do I break my processes apart so that I can do resets of these controls and not have something catastrophic happen. So that's a different way of thinking about the blast radius in terms of the information errors from failures. It's a very different consequence when you've got cyber physical infrastructure that you've got to worry about.
That's fascinating, and hopefully that's a warning to the listeners. And if that's something that they're concerned with, we'll definitely point them in your direction. We'll keep your contact information in the show notes. So if anybody has any questions or would like to work with Stephen, please reach out to him. But I think that is a wrap for today, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
This is Factory of the Future, and we are out of here like finished goods. Stay tuned for our next episode of Factory of the Future, where we're exploring groundbreaking techniques and behaviors that are reshaping industrial landscapes. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review and help others discover the cutting-edge insights transforming manufacturing as we know it.